Even less.
Okay. Okay, we move to the second paper, which is about innovation and foreign technology. The three authors will all three speak. John Cantwell, start, please.
Thank you. Okay, this is a presentation in which all three of us will share in, and therefore, as the chairman has pointed out, we need to be rather well disciplined. I'm going to go first, and then Federico will follow, and Anna will conclude. So perhaps if we could move directly to the next slide, Federico. We're therefore essentially dividing the presentation into three parts. I'll briefly describe initially the aims of what we're setting out to do in the paper and our central argument and where we're going. Secondly, Federico will then talk a bit about the data set that we've developed, which utilises the wider data set of the project as a whole, particularly with respect to productivity growth, but which adds a range of other indicators in innovation and technology transfer that we think are original and which in themselves offer a contribution. So you can see in this point there are essentially two aspects in a way to what we're doing. First of all, we're discussing the role of innovation and technology development within Italy. But second, we're relating that to inward technology transfer, which includes inward foreign direct investment, but not exclusively. That's not the only channel, as it were, that we're considering a variety of other mechanisms and means by which technology may be transferred over time in the process of catch-up in Italy, including, for example, the import of machinery, and various other mechanisms by which the experience of relatively more mature industrialized countries could be translated into the Italian experience. And then thirdly, the more analytical part of the paper, we then pass some judgments on how foreign technology has influenced both Italian innovative performance and more widely the performance of the economy as a whole through productivity growth. And we have both some descriptive and econometric evidence on this. So with respect to the aims of the paper, therefore, underlying this, of course, is a view that innovation generally adds to the dynamism of an economy and is responsible for wealth creation in the form of productivity growth, and that will be allied to increases in living standards over time in this process of catch-up. So we attempt to, as it were, through the use of these indicators, to analyse how this has occurred and in what historical phases the innovation indicators are performed, as it were, relatively well or more weakly. We're tracking here technology transfer through various channels, as I mentioned already, and trying to assess which of these channels mattered most at different historical phases. And then we assess the impact of imported technology on the performance of actors in the recipient country, both in terms of innovation and in terms of productivity growth. So when we get to the end of the paper, we have both an econometric equation on both innovation activity and on productivity growth. So if we go to the next slide, Federico. We would argue that international business connections in one way or another have been critical to the experience of every country catching up, that the mechanisms or the means by which inward technology transfer has occurred have been different depending on particular institutional contexts and historical situations. So, for example, in the Cantwell and Zhang paper referenced here, we were looking particularly at the experience of Japan, in which technology transfer occurred mainly during the interwar years by the means of foreign direct investment, especially American with some European companies investing in Japan. In the early post-war period occurred mainly through licensing and subcontracting, so more arm's length channels for transfer. And then again, more recently, mergers and acquisitions and inward foreign direct investment have become important again. And we provide explanations in that study for why it was that at different phases, different periods, Japanese firms and industry and indeed policymakers were reliant on different sources or channels of transfer and connections. Secondly, this sort of long-term view of Italy that we have is highlighting the experience of different channels in particular phases. And we're looking here also, as Gianni Toniolo emphasised yesterday, at the role of absorptive capacity in this connection. So domestic human capital, we're particularly looking at the role of engineers and technical skills in relating, as it were, inward direct investment and import of domestic machinery and so on, to the ability to generate innovative capacity within Italy. And finally, our argument with respect to direct investment is that it may have stifled, particularly in the post-war period, domestic output of formalised technological knowledge in the form of research and development. So it perhaps had a negative effect on large domestic firm innovative activity through R&D, but it contributed to economic growth more widely, both directly in terms of its impact, in terms of capital formation and output and modernisation, but also indirectly, and this may have taken more time, through spillovers and through channels connecting, as it were, to smaller firms in the Italian economy. So at this point I'll hand over to Federico.
Yes. So with this strategy in mind, our was actually a search, first of all, for stylized facts. And so we start with a data set that was developed with the aim also to perform an econometric analysis. So our attempt was to provide time series. So we have 3 blocks composing our data set and so relate to innovation activity performance, foreign technology transfer, and the development of a domestic absorptive capability. We use several different sources and some were in a kind also discovered. So we will have now an initial assessment of these 3 blocks of variables, of aspects. And so starting with the Italian innovative activity performance, we actually looked at both classic indicators of innovative activities, such as patents, but also we looked for proxies of other forms, softer, less formalized forms of innovation activity performed by Italian firms, such as design and models registration, utility models, and trademarks as well. And we looked also through different patenting locations because to cover such a long period of time, almost 150 years, also were differently relevant in different historical phases the countries targeted by Italian patenting firms. And so then we looked not only at USA, as for shorter time of periods is more usual in the literature, but we looked also at France, Germany, Spain, UK, and Switzerland. So we start with patents. So this is a very long Italian performance in relative terms. Speaking of patents, we will look at the Italian share of patents granted to foreigners in the United States, in this case, as is usual in the literature, to avoid a non-bias factor related to US patentees in their own countries. And so we see that in very long term, we see a mild catch-up in the long term. And if we instead look at several different locations in Europe, actually, we get a first result that actually in Europe, we could have expected, but I don't know, we really didn't know, Italian relative performance was actually better. And also there is something related to the different historical phases. So the Giulittian phase is more evident across different European patenting locations targeted by Italian firms. And also, it's interesting perhaps for what happens post-World War II, in the post-World War II period. So if we get back to the US PTO, so patents registered by Italians in the US, we see actually that definitely Italy didn't have any takeoff in patenting activity, international patenting activity, as perhaps had Japan, and this is the really top-end line. Instead, the Italian one is the end below. Of course, there are other countries, and so if we restrain to lower grade patenting performances, actually we see in the red line that Italy had a catch-up, but actually this was almost consumed at the beginning of the 60s. We see again another catch-up in patent activity is the South Korea in more recent years. But then if we concentrate on European patenting locations, actually, in post-World War II period, the Italian effort is not so reversed early in the 1960s, but actually there is some still growing up of Italian shares towards the 1980s. And actually, again, in Europe, we get a larger share of international patents than in the US. It's true that since 1990s, this decreasing trend seems to be shared by both sides of the Atlantic. And so also in recent times, we look at European Patent Office patents. In the end, it's true this better performance, but still low and lower than Italian economic position in the world economy. So here also we look through sectoral data, but I think we will not have time, but in case just in the end of the presentation. So if we we switch to softer innovation activity performance, we see that actually looking this time at designer models, but even for utility models that are kind of junior patents important in the German patenting system, Italian performance back in the 20s and 30s was a really lower ranking one. But actually after World War II, in respect to this softer, more incremental oriented innovation, Italian performance is quite better, and actually it ranks much higher than for patenting among Europeans and not only Europeans. Then we looked at trademarks, and again here it's interesting because we have an evolution through time, and again back in the 20s and 30s, also because at the time trademarks were more related to company names, so really big firms that were pushing their brands to conquer international markets. Italy was below the others, but actually in recent years, Italian performance, in recent years after World War II, Italian performance was in a catch-up track and closer to her competitors. And even nowadays, at the Office for Modernization of the Internal Market, the European Office for Trademarks Registration, we are third in Europe, and it's not at all the same story as for patents. We then go to import of foreign technologies, and here we cover different channels. Okay, we go straight to the data. Imports of capital goods. For sure, we benefit from a long effort by Giovanni, Federico, Tattara, Professor Tattare, Vasta, and the Bank of Italy as well, with Sandra Anatoli, that developed 1861-62 to 1950 time series on imports, very detailed for product fields. So we worked on the old data and new data to have time series till nowadays, and we see actually that the investment effort in imported machinery was very relevant across Italian history, but especially in the Giulitan phase in respect to the 1920s and 30s. And also, as we will see, in respect to the post-World War II period, because something happens more after World War II. Here we have basically two lines. One is imports of machinery on imports of machinery goods, and the other is import of machinery on investment. And this data trace a coherent story, a very important initial investment in foreign machinery. Then it's interesting, if we look at different kinds of machinery imports, we see that just in the 1930s, we start to import machine tools, so machine to make machines, and before was more a matter of general, not so specialized machinery. And then, as we will see later, something also happens, because probably these also machine tools imports fed more changes in the internal domestic structure. We then go to inward FDI, and here again the effort was to have a figure that could proxy something that was going on in the longer term. And here we stress the Jolittian relevance of FDI inwards on GDP. The story of post-World War II, it's a different story, because we have a first part in which till late, early 70s, again, FDIs are an important component of Italian productive history, but instead, in recent years, the problem is a completely different one, because we see this skyrocketing FDI on GDP ratio, but actually, if we look in a comparison, international comparison, we see that actually Italy, since 1980s, is diverging versus other main trading partners. We then also looked at technological balance of payment figures. So this is the import of disembodied technology. So how and when and how much we bought patents, licenses, designs, blueprints to be used to produce, but also to be imitated, to be recombinated in innovation, and in an adaptation of foreign technologies. So here it's very interesting, because if we look at this figure, so the red line is technological balance of payment expenses in respect to GDP, we see actually that there is a catch-up, and in the 1980s was reached a level of 0.35% of GDP. And when we remember that at that time the whole effort in R&D in Italy was close to 1%, we understand that the effort in acquiring from abroad technologies was a relevant one. Again, apparently in recent years, and especially in comparison with other countries' experience, since 1990s, our position is retrenching. Then we looked at domestic absorptive capability. So we looked for human capital, but for technical human capital, and again we looked at R&D investment, and also important the development of a domestic production industrial machinery. So here we have engineers. So we looked for data to have a picture. Here we have students enrolled in engineering courses on total university students. So we see actually that before and during the first Italian catch-up phase of the Jolittian years, actually there was an increasing investment in high technical education. Then we have a dramatic rehearsal that we also, in a sense, relate to the Gentiles reform. And then, interesting, in the post-World War II era, if you look at engineer students as you normally get from statistical sources, you would get an higher green line, but actually subtracting architectural students, we get the blue line. So during the Golden Age, there was not this strong focus on high technical education, but actually in this period was more important in intermediary technical education, the one provided by Istituti Tecnici. And so in respect to the Giolitian phase, where we had this green line that were lower grade vocational schools, yes, instead in recent times, after post-World War II, actually there was an investment in these intermediate technical skills. Now I said about R&D investment, and so the disappointing Italian performance, especially in recent years, there is a divergence of Italian performance vis-à-vis other main countries. And I close this part with a focus on the domestic machinery industry. So here we have production of machinery industry, domestic production on internal gross investment in machinery. And actually for the first time since the 1950s, since 1861, in 1950s and 1960s, we have a domestic industrial machinery that is providing to its customers machines designed and tailored on their needs, and actually also an industry that was able to gain a new advantage, a new important position in international markets, as developing exports in the long term, quite important. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and here we come to the econometric analysis, which is articulated in two stages. In the first one, we estimated innovation equation, with which we want to assess in particular the impact of foreign technology on the Italian innovation performance. And the second equation, in which we relate our imports of technology and innovation and the domestic innovation, of course, to the Italian productivity growth. Okay, thank you. Here are the results of the first equation. And we can see in the first column the results for the overall period, 1889-2008, whereas we have subdivided these overall periods in the following columns. And for the latest period, we have two equations because we have tried two different specifications. And, okay, the overall results here for the main period, we can see that the main message that comes across here is that the import of machinery played a positive role and complemented and supported the Italian innovation process. Here, the first variable, machinery imports. And another variable that was very important throughout is engineers and technicians, our proxy of technical human capital. And to significance, but to a lesser extent, constantly throughout the period, is industry share, which is basically the share of manufacturing industry and share of manufacturing within the industry. And that's also significant, as I said, but not consistently throughout each single sub-period. And what instead really is particularly important to point out here is the ambivalent role of inward FDIs. What we find is that FDIs have an overall negative impact, are negatively associated with Italian innovation performance, and only in the Giolitian period, the investment foreign direct investment is instead positively associated, and even negative in the extended Golden Age, 1949-1980. We interpret this by seeing foreign direct investment as competitors for large domestic firms. We need to remember that our indicator is patenting abroad, Italian patenting abroad. So we acknowledge that such indicator reflects in particular, more accurately, the patenting activity and innovation activity of large firms rather than small and medium-sized firms. Therefore, the foreign direct investment might have presented competitors for domestic firms, and competitors for which, let's say, the domestic firms were not well equipped from a technological point of view to compete with, particularly because they were mainly domestically oriented. And yeah, these are the main points that we need to mention when talking about the overall period. And instead, when talking about the latest sub-period, particularly in the latest specification, we want to point 1981-2008 in column 6. We want to point out that in addition to the technicians, so to the technical human capital available in the country, are also important R&D, and this is the first sub-period for which we can measure it for continuity of data, and are also important, and the other thing that is important is technological gap. So it becomes an opportunity for advancing more quickly. And yeah, we can go to the second estimate. Okay, and here we have the second part of our econometric analysis. Here we have basically assessed the importance of domestic innovation, and domestic in the sense of generated within the country, so the first variable, Italian patents abroad, and foreign imported, imports of foreign technology, the second and third variables, machinery imports and inward foreign direct investment. And then we have again the proxies for the indicators for technical human capital, and here we have the results. We have basically, it's important to notice that the domestic innovation activity plays an important role in the productivity growth. And what is also very important to notice is that there is let's say, collaboration, let's say, the foreign innovation, foreign technology through the second and third variables and the Italian one, both contribute systematically to the growth of productivity throughout the period and in various sub-periods. The important factor to notice is also the positive sign associated with engineers, and again, to stress the importance of the domestic absorptive capacity. And finally, the productivity gap, the importance of which we interpret in an Abramovitz way, where basically the productivity gap becomes an opportunity for catching up when it is sustained by internal absorptive capacity. And finally, to conclude, we have run out of time completely. Okay, so to sum up the conclusions, we found that patenting abroad grew in the Jolitian era and in the post-World War II, but still it has only modest level, particularly when compared to the other industrialized competitors. And imports of the other important aspects that we find is that imports of machinery were the main channel of introduction of new technologies, whereas stocks of inward FDIs, we see that they reach higher level in the Golden Age, and such levels are only touched again at the end of the Golden Age. And since the 1990s, these are less than 4 main trading partners. And we can skip these specific results. We can go. Yeah. So basically, in the end, we have mainly what we can conclude by saying is that the imports of foreign technology happen mainly through trade-based channels. And we also find important the importance of FDI is that it is negative when looking at its impact on formalized innovation, whereas it is positive when looking at productivity growth. So suggests that firms absorbed and adapted new technology and organizational structures. In particular, we can conclude saying that we have an Abramovich catching up story where appropriate domestic absorptive capacity, human capital in particular, is critical. Thank you.
Very much. Now, Giovanni Dosi will discuss your...
This paper has got to be commended for the thorough view over very many different indicators of technology transfer from abroad, but also proxies for technological accumulation at home. Well, it is after all, it is somewhat a sad story of the inability of Italy of joining the club of major international innovators. This is why I called provocatively this discussion the catching up interrupters. In fact, you have, as the paper shows abundantly, two unfinished episodes of catching up, one in the late 19th century to World War I, the Giolitti period, and then the so-called Golden Age after World War II up to the 70s. Can you? Well, you cannot see it very well, but just to fix the idea, in 1900, the share of Italian patent in the U.S., of non-U.S. recipient of patent, the Italian share was 0.92, while the German share was more than 30%. In 1929, it was 1.19, and the German share was 32.33%. This gives you an idea of the order of failed catching up. And if you go to 2007, Italy has got more or less a share equal to that of Israel, despite the fact that the Italian population is almost 7 times as much. And Taiwan has got 7.88, South Korea 8.1. That is, to repeat, Italy has basically not been able to achieve a sustained rate of innovation as formalized in the patenting activity. I mean, with all the limitation, we don't have time now to enter into the limitation of that proxy, but it is a good proxy of formalized research, even in sector in which patenting is not the primary way of appropriating rent from innovation. The causes. I think that if you want to single out one major cause, this is related to policies, or better, the lack of policies. I mean, if you compare, again, it's interesting to compare Italy with Germany, late unifier too, starting from a largely agricultural economy. Germany undertake, since the Zollverein, a systematic effort to catch up, and to catch up in precise direction, as we shall see in a second, by explicitly also messing around with the state, messing around with the industrial structure and with the very nature of industrial actors. In Italy, you have a free trade anti-industrial interest that dominate the scene, at least till the Crispi era. And even then, you have patchwork type industrial protection. Yes. As a consequence, you had a lack of those policies that are most often present in successful catching up episodes. As we discussed, so I make some also some advertisement. As we discussed in this book with Mario Cimoli and Joe Stiglitz, basically in all episodes of successful catching up, you have various ingredients, including one is emulation in the most dynamic technological paradigms, irrespectively of comparative advantages. There is a determinant, think of Japan, think of Korea. In a way, they, as Alice Hamster does it, you want on purpose to get prices wrong, in the sense that you won't distort the market signals in ways that foster the accumulation of capabilities in the most dynamic sectors. This has not been, even in the Jolitian period, an explicit policy aim, while it has been in Germany. Second, there's been very little appreciation of the role of domestic firms as carrier of innovative activities. Foreign multinationals most often carry with them efficient production capacity, but rarely transfer innovative capability to host countries. The major carrier of innovation are domestic firms, by and large. And policies in, think of, again, from Germany to Japan, policies have explicitly addressed the growth of domestic strong oligopolies. In Italy, it did not happen. Relatedly, there's never been, even in the Jolitian period, a coherent and comprehensive set of measures for infant industry nurturing, as we call it in the book with Cimoli and Stiglitz. But just piecemeal measures, say, for example, the Buy Italian provision in the Railroad Act, but it was a Buy Italian that was buy preferably made in Italy, not buy from Italian firms. Or you have got very rough ones. I mean, autarky, you close down everything and you substitute also coffee and bananas if you can. Next. Together, this comes with a lack of both a state technocracy and lack of an emerging corporate technocracy. And remember that since the Chandlerian revolution in business organization, a good deal of innovative capabilities is incorporated into the practices, collective routines of business firms. I wanted to highlight this beautiful citation of Congressman Rizzetti in the Italian Parliament saying, in Italy, one should work more and study a little bit less. We have first to become wealthy and powerful, and later on we will become a learned and science-minded nation, which links very well with the Bertola Sestito paper. This was said at the same time when, for the first time, in the middle of the Second Industrial Revolution, science was playing a direct role in industrial development, especially in electricity and chemistry. This gives you the Weltanschauung at the time. What happened after World War II? Well, after World War II, an important carrier of technological accumulation the accumulation of technological knowledge were state-owned enterprises. And the way they have been privatized, that was a major shock on the innovative abilities of the Italian industrial system. I mean, if there is, if I may say so, if there is one date to name a major Italian disaster, has been the Britannia, in which one agreed to sell quickly for dirty, non-smelling money everything, all the jewels of the family, without any intent of having private oligopolistic big players. And in fact, I mean, the first thing that the private did, for example, in telecom, was to close down every R&D, all R&D. We have had, I think, a systematic neglect of the crucial importance of having a strong domestic participation in international oligopolies. Examples. We were, at some point between the late 50s and the early 60s, Olivetti was more than competitive with IBM. Olivetti tried to get state support for his mainframe computer, and simply got a no. A few years before, we had the crazy investment in basic chemicals in the South. On an order of magnitude lower of what was given to the chemical firms, the Olivetti simply was said no by the government, and they had to sell to General Electric. Montedison was, I mean, if the competitor had tried to destroy the Italian technological capability in chemicals, I think would not have done better than what the Italian did. With starting from the way the electrical industry was nationalized in such a way that all the incentive structure was moved toward getting the refund from the state rather than doing long-term research, on which Montecatini excelled. The Donegani Institute was a jewel of Italian research, and we had the last scientific Nobel Prize, homegrown in chemistry, NAT, that developed polypropylene with Montecatini. We had a good pharmaceutical industry that, when we dismantled Montedison, we lost with it. I think, okay, I'll get down to the... things got even worse. No, go back, and I'll end up there. Things got worse after the 70s, in which there was a sort of, on the one side, one operated purposefully in weakening the Italian participation to the international oligopoly, in electronics, in chemicals, in drugs. And the other, there was this emerging, small is beautiful, third Italy, Weltanschauung, saying we can substitute many shoemakers to the lack of an electronic industry. That was a major mistake, and I think now we are seeing it with a lag. We are seeing the consequences, also in terms of flat productivity growth in this first decade. I don't have time, I think, to enter into the two examples. One of success, one of success in machine tools, that basically was generated by the incremental accumulation of diffused incremental accumulation of technological capabilities, spin-offs from incumbent electromechanical firms, user-producer interaction, and in some areas, broad technical education. This is interesting. Is a case in which machine tools don't rely on big size, don't rely on big technostructure, and so we're able to develop, despite the weakness of the Italian participation in the international rigopo. The story, I've already hinted at that, the story of chemicals is exactly the opposite. A story of a sector in which we were also original innovators since the late part of the 19th century in some areas, that we grew to become a major international player, and essentially for perverse policy intervention, we destroyed it all. The message is not very optimistic. It's clear, but it's not very optimistic. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Giovanni. We still have 10 minutes for discussion, comments. Francesca?
I'm not surprised of the effect of inward FDI, because inward FDI have a potential benefits on the host countries, and to transform this potential benefit in real benefits, really the policy implemented are very important. So here policy failure is very important. We could deal more on which type of policy, but there is no time. The second comment on Giovanni comments is the fact that I think we have to redress a balance. It's not only a policy failure, but it is really a combined failure. It's also a managerial failure, and here education has a lot to do. So I think we have not to push the emphasis too much on the policy failure. That is not the whole story. It's too easy in a way. And the detailed comment is on the table 7.1, that is a key table of the econometric result. We have different specification for the different periods. And we say that a major channel is machinery imports. That's very important. But we don't have the variable for the last 3 periods. So I would like, I don't know if that there is time now to discuss about that. I will certainly discuss with the author about this issue. Thank you.
First, let me say that this is a very, very nice, very interesting paper. All my comments will be on the same table, 7.1, and on econometrics, and have basically 2 points, one suggestion. First point, you all use OLS, and I'm wondering whether, especially not in this one, but in the second one, whether there is any endogeneity problem with the TFP growth and other variables. Second point, I'm a little bit surprised or puzzled by the fact that you do not have any lag. So in your, or like how many years? Okay, it's okay. So because it's not very clear. Is 1 to 5 is so the inward FDI is the 5 year. Okay. Third, I'm wondering because the share of patents, Italian patents abroad, is unweighted mean. So I'm wondering whether a fixed effect regression could be useful, considering different countries, because I mean, summing up shares in Switzerland, the United States may be a little bit tricky. But this said, I found very interesting the paper.
I think there are 2 ways to look at the table. Moreover, if you also check table 4.1 and 4.2 in the paper, I see that in 1883, the ratio of Italian patents in the US, of course, to Germans was, it's even difficult to say, I would say something like 80, while it becomes 7 or even 6 actually in 2007. If it is how did you say, what was your title? Exactly what should we say about Germany, France, and UK? That would be a total disaster. So now we should try and rebalance the assessment, because what I see is a significant increase with respect to the main European competitors. If you, again, I stress, if you make the share, that is a relative comparative advantage, of course, there is a substantial increase. If you look at the paper, data are even more, provide an even more optimistic figure, because I see that the total is 1.9 in the period of 2001 to 2008. If I watch at table 4.2, we have a surprising, I would say, but substantial increase in the revealed technological advantage in a number of key sectors and key technologies. So maybe we should try and make an effort to appreciate more what the paper says, which is that indeed we have not been able yet to recover or to complete the catch-up, but a large part of it has been done in a context where the main European competitors clearly declined. Thank you.
Could you take into account in some way innovation in the software sector, including internet services, where the patent-based indicators don't fit well?
Just in 30 seconds, yes, you are right that in pointing out that Italy started from extremely low level, decreased the gap with Germany. But these are countries of not enormously different size. And in fact, a good proxy of catching up would be if Italy and Germany would converge, say, to Italy having 50% or 60% of the German share. 1 to 7 is still an indicator that is not noise. I mean, 1 to 7 is a bit heavier than that.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for all those very helpful comments. I think Giovanni is, broadly speaking, right that, and this is kind of implicit and sometimes explicit in the paper, that the success part of the story is one that is associated with smaller and medium-sized firms, and that they were very highly sort of export-oriented in character, and so the business networks that they joined were typically divorced, as it were, from the networks of the larger firms that were more sort of domestically oriented within Italy, and which were therefore failing to participate in, as it were, the international oligopolies. So I think, there's something about the Italian industrial structure that you really have to take into account when you're considering this innovation history. I think, however, Francesca is also, broadly speaking, right, that there's a wider picture that goes beyond just policy to the whole society and to the industrial structure. It was something, in fact, that we noted in the Cantwell and Zhang study, but it comes out as well in studies of emerging market economies, that if you look at the different channels, for example, for inward foreign technology transfer, and you simply attribute these to policies, as people sometimes do. So they say, for example, in the case of Japan, there was a shift from direct investment to licensing because, as they did, the Japanese prohibited largely inward-coming investment in the early post-war years. But you also then have to understand that that was to some extent endogenous. That was partly attributable to the institutional and industrial structure of Japan that made that kind of policy feasible and, as it were, encouraged that type of policy environment. So you have to, I think, understand that there's a broader picture within which policy is taking place, and that policy in some sense is set in this, is endogenous in this wider institutional environment of society as a whole, in industrial structure and the key actors in terms of the business environment. So it is, I think, quite a complicated story to tease out the interrelationship between, government and business over time, which is a large part, I think, of this whole story.
Yes. You want to start? Okay. So, okay, thank you very much to Giovanni Dosi's comment. And we, in the paper, we share some of his views, and some other instead we do not share. But in the end, the relevance of policy, innovation policy, is somehow through the papers, I would say in two main points. On the positive side is, in a sense, there was a non-intentional policy towards innovation in what we found back in the 1950s. In the ERP program, we looked at data, and we looked at data about Italian as a recipient country of foreign aid from the US in respect to other European countries. Actually, at that time, we did something with a focus on the machinery industry, both on the import side of importing machinery from, at the technological frontier from the US, but also investing counterpart funds resources in sustaining domestic machinery industry. Then later in our post-World War II story, in a sense, what was done to finance or to subsidize some machinery investments probably went in the same direction of sustaining a domestic machinery industry. On the negative side, I would say that I agree completely on the dismal performance of some high-tech industries. I would say also from these tables that I didn't show in the end but are in the papers, that story is not linear. So actually it's interesting because if we look at technological specialization within product fields, within technological classes, we see actually that we started with a more high-tech patenting specialization, but then through the interwar periods, we moved towards more an intermediate and traditional technological specialization. The good news is that we got some specialization advantage, so it's not that we don't have any, as many countries do, but we do lose our main specialization in high-tech sectors. And it's something that is going on also in the last 10 and 20 years. We looked also at Apple patents, European Patent Office patents by technological fields. So this is a huge problem, and of course it's policy connected as managerial connected. That's it. On the estimation side, I think I already in part responded. For other points I can in personal communication.
I want to join the thank you choir for Giovanni Dosi's comments, and I'll try and answer a couple of questions. About your point, how we take into account the ICT, basically industry, the innovation in there, because obviously, particularly the software industry does not patent its innovations. This is a wider issue. This is how we take into account the varying propensity to patents across industries. We do that in two ways. Basically, in this table that we have right in front of us, we do that by using the technological advantage. and where basically we take into account, we adjust for that, for this bias. We don't have the formula right here, but it's a well-established way to study the revealed technological advantage, which has exactly, the advantage of taking into account varying propensity to patent across industries and across countries, because it is also possible that different countries have different institutional systems, and therefore that affects also the granting of patents. And also, inside in the other data sets that we have used for our estimates, we take into account of this by always using international comparisons. So if that is something that affects us, it also affects the other countries like Spain, France, Germany, etc., the UK, etc. So that effect is covered. And then about endogeneity, that's actually the reason why some variables are not included in the tables, because we had to drop those variables that prove signs of collinearity, high collinearity, etc., and that had to be dropped, and we rerun the estimate using also only the variables that were suitable. Yeah. But we can discuss in detail variable by variable what happened.
Okay, thanks.